A torrential summer storm raged outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grand Sterling Hotel, the thunder practically shaking the reinforced glass. Inside, New York's most ruthless crime syndicate held court. When her wheelchair bumped directly into the Don's legs, the entire room held its breath. Then, amidst a sea of drawn weapons, he whispered a single terrifying word. The grand ballroom of the Grand Sterling had been a cacophony of applause, laughter, and clinking champagne glasses just moments ago. Alara Vance tightened her grip on the push rims of her specialized wheelchair, navigating her way out of the opulent venue. She had just finished performing at a high society wedding, her custom carbon fiber violin case resting securely on her lap. She was still wearing her performance attire, a delicate, elegant white lace gown that cascaded perfectly over her lifeless legs, its intricate floral patterns a stark contrast to the heavy black metal of her chair. Her long, wavy, dark hair fell flawlessly over her shoulders, framing a face pale with exhaustion. To be paralyzed from the waist down in New York City was to navigate a turbulent ocean entirely at the mercy of accessibility and infrastructure. She needed to cross the vast, echoing marble lobby to reach the valet before the flash flood outside stranded her completely. She didn't know that she was about to roll directly into the epicenter of a Mafia war. Less than 50 feet away, Dante Thorne was descending the grand staircase. He moved with the predatory, silent grace of a man who owned not just the building, but the very lives of everyone inside it. Clad in a bespoke light gray suit accented with a crimson tie and a matching silk pocket square, Dante was the undisputed head of the Thorne Syndicate, the most feared organization on the eastern seaboard. Intricate, dark ink crept up his muscular neck and covered the backs of his hands, a stark, violent contrast to the heavy gold Patek Philippe watch peeking from his French cuffs. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed, tattooed men led by his ruthless underboss, Silas. They had just concluded a brutal negotiation in a private suite upstairs. A rogue faction from the Falcone family had attempted to bypass the Thorns' underground blackmail vaults. Dante had dealt with the traitor personally, leaving a broken, bleeding man begging for mercy on the Persian rug of the penthouse. Dante's adrenaline was still running high, his dark, calculating eyes scanning the lobby for threats. He was a man who trusted no one and forgave nothing. "Bring the armored convoy to the front," Dante ordered Silas, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. "And have the Falcone warehouses in Queens burned to the ground before midnight. Leave no witnesses." "Consider it done, boss," Silas replied, reaching for his earpiece. Dante took another step toward the exit, his mind already shifting to the logistics of a full-scale underworld war. And then it happened. Alara, hurrying across the pristine marble floor to beat the rush of departing wedding guests, pushed her wheels a little too hard around a towering marble pillar. A bellhop suddenly stepped into her path with a luggage cart. To avoid a collision, Ilara's arms flared, her hands clamping down on her left wheel while pushing hard on the right. Her wheelchair swerved sharply, placing her directly in the path of the syndicate's exit. Her front casters bumped sharply against Dante Thorne's polished leather shoes. Alara gasped, pulling back forcefully on the rims to halt her chair abruptly. The sudden stop jerked her slightly forward, but she caught herself, her hands gripping her armrests. In a fraction of a second, the atmosphere in the Grand Sterling shifted from luxurious tranquility to lethal tension. Click-clack. The unmistakable, terrifying sound of 6 Glock handguns being drawn and racked filled the cavernous space. Silas and the heavily tattooed bodyguards instantly formed a tactical semicircle around their don. Their weapons were trained directly on the paralyzed girl in the pristine white lace dress who had dared to breach Dante Thorne's personal space. "Step back," Silas barked, his finger tightening dangerously on the trigger. Alara froze, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She was perfectly still in her chair, but she was trapped. She stared at the black muzzles of the guns, smelling the sudden metallic tang of gun oil and the sharp scent of aggressive, expensive aftershave. Terror paralyzed her far more than her severed spine ever could. She slowly looked up, her wide, fearful hazel eyes meeting the towering figure of the man blocking her path. Dante had reacted entirely on instinct, his combat reflexes flaring the moment something struck his legs. But as he looked down at the fragile girl in the wheelchair, time seemed to fracture and grind to an absolute halt. He saw the pristine white lace of her gown, looking like a fallen angel amidst his demons. He saw the panicked, sightless terror in her eyes staring up at him. And then, as she swallowed hard, his gaze locked onto the delicate, jagged scar resting at the base of her neck, a surgical scar from a spinal fusion he had paid the world's best neurosurgeons to perform 10 years ago. Dante's breath hitched in his throat. The cold, calculating Mafia Don suddenly looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His large, heavily tattooed hand reached out, but he didn't shove her away. Instead, he gently cupped the side of her face. His thumb brushed against her jawline, his ink-stained fingers warm against her pale skin in a desperate, possessive hold. "Boss?" Silas asked, confusion lacing his aggressive tone. "Give the word." Dante didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the terrified hotel patrons cowering behind the lobby pillars. His eyes were entirely consumed by the trembling girl sitting in the wheelchair before him, the girl he had spent a decade watching from the shadows, the girl he had promised to protect at all costs. He leaned down, his face mere inches from hers, and whispered a single terrifying word that sent a shockwave through the room. Mine, the word wasn't a claim of property. It was a desperate vow laced with a decade of hidden guilt and an obsession that defied all logic. The absolute silence that followed Dante's whisper was deafening. Alara trembled, her mind rapidly processing the overwhelming stimuli. The man holding her face smelled of rich Tom Ford-Oud wood, fresh rain, and the faint underlying metallic scent of fresh blood. "Put the guns away," Dante commanded. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a lethal authority that brooked zero hesitation. "Dante, we don't know who," Silas started. "I said, put them away," Dante snarled, shooting his underboss a glare so venomous it made the seasoned killer take a physical step back. The sound of weapons being holstered rippled through the lobby. Alara finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't see you coming around the pillar. Please, just let me pass." She tried to push her wheels backward, relying on her upper body strength, but Dante's tattooed hand remained gently yet firmly cupping her cheek, holding her in place. "You're not leaving," Dante said softly, his tone completely shifting from the monster he had been seconds prior. "Silas, fetch her coat from the cloakroom." Carefully. Before Alara could protest, Dante stepped around to the back of her chair and gripped her push handles. "Come with me, Alara." Hearing her own name fall from this dangerous stranger's lips sent a jolt of pure ice down her spine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" she demanded, aggressively locking her brakes with a sharp click. But Dante simply reached down, his large hand enveloping hers, and effortlessly unlocked the brakes. "I am someone who owes you a debt," Dante replied cryptically, as he pushed her chair toward the private VIP side exit. A massive black Mercedes Maybach S65 armored limousine was idling at the curb, its rear door already held open by a stoic driver. "I'm not getting in a car with you," Elara shouted, panic finally overriding her shock. She grabbed the wheels, trying to stop the forward momentum. "Elara, listen to me," Dante said, stepping around to face her, his voice dropping to a desperate, intense register. "Marcus Falcone's men are currently kicking down the door of your apartment on West 74th Street. If you go home tonight, you will die. Get in the car." The sheer conviction in his voice, coupled with the terrifying mention of a home invasion at her exact address, shattered her resistance. Numb with shock, she allowed him to lift her gently from the wheelchair. She felt the hard muscle beneath his gray suit as he placed her carefully into the plush, heated leather interior of the Maybach. Silas swiftly folded the wheelchair and placed it in the trunk alongside her violin case before climbing into the front passenger seat. As the heavy armored doors sealed shut, cutting off the storm entirely, the car merged seamlessly into the chaotic New York traffic. The drive was agonizingly silent. Elara sat rigidly against the door, her hands tightly folded over the white lace of her dress on her lap, while Dante sat opposite her, his intense gaze entirely fixed on her face. He poured a glass of Macallan 25 from the car's crystal decanter and placed it gently into her hand. "Drink, it will settle your nerves," he ordered softly. She took a small burning sip, the liquid fire grounding her racing mind. "Why is someone trying to kill me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I'm a disabled violinist. I teach music. I don't have enemies." "You don't," Dante corrected, pouring himself a drink. "Your father did." Elara's head snapped toward him. "My father, Arthur Vance, was a corporate archivist. He managed records. He died in a car crash 10 years ago." Dante let out a heavy, cynical sigh, the gold watch catching the dim light of the cabin. "Your father, Arthur, was a brilliant man, Elara, but he wasn't just a corporate archivist. He was the master blackmailer for the Thorn Crime Syndicate." "My syndicate?" Elara's breath caught. "You're lying. My father was a good, boring man." "He was the keeper of the Black Ledger," Dante countered, his tone devoid of malice, only heavy with a grim truth. "He held the darkest secrets, the financial ruins, and the video evidence of every corrupt politician, judge, and rival boss in this city. He was a ghost in the system, the best we ever had. But 10 years ago, the Falcone family found out who he was. They wanted the ledger." Dante leaned forward, the scent of his cologne enveloping her. "That car crash on Interstate 95. It wasn't a drunk driver, Elara. It was a Falcone hitman. Your father swerved his sedan to take the brunt of the impact so you would survive in the passenger seat. The crushed metal severed your spine, but his sacrifice saved your life." Tears pricked Elara's eyes as the buried trauma of that horrific night violently resurfaced. The screeching tires, the crushing weight of the dashboard, her father's final choked gasp, holding her hand in the wreckage. "Why are you telling me this now?" She sobbed, the whiskey glass shaking in her grip. "Why ruin my memory of him?" "Because Marcus Falcone just found out that Arthur Vance's daughter is still alive," Dante said, his voice tightening with suppressed rage, his tattooed knuckles turning white. "He thinks your father left the Black Ledger with you. They were at your apartment tonight to torture it out of you." The Maybach smoothly pulled into a private subterranean parking garage, the heavy steel gates slamming shut behind them with a definitive clang. "For 10 years I have watched from the shadows," Dante confessed, the vulnerability in his voice a jarring contrast to his intimidating presence. Elara's mind raced as pieces of her life, suddenly snapped together with terrifying clarity. "The anonymous grant for my customized wheelchair," she whispered. "Funded through a shell corporation in Geneva," Dante confirmed. "The experimental physical therapy at Johns Hopkins. Paid for in cash," he replied. Dante reached across the console, his large tattooed hand gently enveloping her trembling fingers. He didn't force the contact, allowing her to pull away if she chose to, but she was too stunned to move. "When my father passed, I took over the syndicate," Dante said, his thumb lightly tracing her knuckles. "I swore on his grave that the debt we owed Arthur Vance would be paid. I promised to keep you safe. You were never supposed to know about me, Alara. You were supposed to live a beautiful, ordinary life in the light, far away from my darkness." The car door opened, and Silas quickly retrieved her wheelchair, setting it up perfectly beside the door. "But tonight, the darkness found you," Dante said, stepping out and lifting her effortlessly from the seat, placing her gently into her chair. "Welcome to 432 Park Avenue. You are in the most secure fortress in Manhattan. You will stay here until every last member of the Falcone family is eradicated from this earth." Alara gripped her push rims. She had stumbled into the lobby of the Grand Sterling as a helpless musician. Instead, she had rolled directly into a golden cage, held captive by a Mafia don who had secretly orchestrated her entire existence. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was a sensory fortress suspended a quarter of a mile above the chaotic streets of Manhattan. For 3 days, Alara existed within a world of absolute, suffocating luxury. Her wheelchair glided silently over heated Afghan silk rugs and cool, imported Carrara marble. The air was perpetually climate-controlled, carrying the subtle synthesized fragrance of white tea and fig. Yet, despite the opulent comfort and the fully accessible custom modifications Dante had clearly rushed to install, it was a high-altitude prison. Dante Thorne treated her with a terrifying, reverent obsession. He rarely slept. Alara could hear the heavy, measured pacing of his handmade Berluti Oxfords on the hardwood floors late into the night. He fed her elaborate meals prepared by a private Michelin-starred chef, provided her with racks of silk loungewear, and spent hours simply sitting in the corner of the grand living room, watching her carefully clean and rosin her violin bow. But beneath the surface of this gilded cage, a mafia war was boiling over. The Falcone family, desperate and cornered, was tearing the city apart looking for her. Sirens wailed endlessly from the streets below, a distant symphony of the chaos Dante was orchestrating to crush his enemies. On the 4th evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse shattered. Silas burst through the double mahogany doors, his heavy breathing audible even over the classical sonata playing on the sound system. Boss Silas's voice was tight, urgent. "Marcus Falcone just made a move on the Teterboro airstrip. They intercepted a shipment of our heavy artillery. It's a bloodbath. They have our men pinned down in Hangar 4. Dante cursed, the sound of a heavy glass tumbler slamming onto a table echoing through the room. "Marcus is getting desperate. He knows we are closing the net. I need to be there to coordinate the extraction." "It's risky, Dante," Silas warned. "It could be a distraction. I don't have a choice. If I lose that shipment, the Commission will view it as weakness," Dante snarled. Alara heard the metallic scrape of him loading a magazine into his customized Sig Sauer P226. He crossed the room, stopping inches from where Alara sat in her wheelchair, her violin case resting on her lap. "Alara," he said, his voice instantly softening, dropping an octave into that possessive tone that made her skin prickle. "I have to leave for a few hours. The building is on total lockdown. The elevators require biometric clearance. No one gets in or out. "Are you going to be safe?" she asked, her voice trembling perfectly, projecting the image of the terrified, disabled civilian he believed her to be. "I am always safe, Mia Luce," he murmured, his tattooed knuckles gently brushing her cheek, just as they had in the hotel. "I am leaving Cale to oversee your personal detail. He is my top captain. You have nothing to fear." With a sudden rush of cold air and the heavy thud of the reinforced doors, Dante and Silas were gone. The vast penthouse fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Elara sat perfectly still in her chair, her hands resting lightly on her white lace dress. She listened to the faint hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the whistling of the wind against the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass. And she listened to the deliberate, heavy breathing of the man Dante had left behind, Cale. He was standing near the entryway. He smelled heavily of cheap tobacco, peppermint gum, and the distinct underlying odor of nervous sweat. It was the sweat of a man whose adrenaline was spiking. When Cale's voice finally broke the silence, it lacked the respectful deference he usually displayed around Dante. There was a cruel, sharp edge to it. The famous Elara Vance, the crippled princess sitting on a ghost fortune. Elara didn't move. "Dante said you were here to protect me." Cale let out a low, humorless chuckle. She heard the distinct, terrifying sound of a silencer being screwed onto the barrel of a pistol. "Dante is a fool," Cale sneered, his footsteps moving slowly across the Persian rug toward her. "He let his obsession with you blind him to the reality of the business. You don't burn down half of New York over a girl in a wheelchair. Marcus Falcone offered me $3 million and a territory in Queens to open the door from the inside. The Teterboro attack? Just bait to get the boss out of the penthouse." Elara's breathing grew shallow. "You're betraying him." "I'm securing my retirement," Cale corrected. He was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Marcus doesn't want you dead, sweetheart. Not yet. He wants the black ledger your father hid. The master drives containing the ruin of every politician in this state. Arthur Vance was a paranoid man. He wouldn't just destroy it. He left it with you." "I don't know what you're talking about." Elara whimpered, shrinking back into the leather seat of her wheelchair, her hands trembling over her open violin case. "I'm just a musician. I haven't walked since I was 12. Cut the crap." Cale spat. He reached out and brutally grabbed a fistful of her dark hair, yanking her head back. Elara cried out in pain, her pristine white lace dress shifting as she struggled. "You're going to tell me exactly how to access the black ledger, or I'm going to take a hammer to those delicate, expensive hands of yours, one by one." Cale made his first fatal mistake. He assumed her paralysis equaled helplessness. He assumed the trembling girl in the white dress was nothing more than a fragile victim. He didn't know that Arthur Vance, the most feared blackmail architect on the East Coast, had spent his final years turning his crippled daughter into the ultimate vault for his secrets. He didn't realize that a decade of navigating the world purely through upper body strength had turned her arms and core into coiled steel. "Please," Elara sobbed, her hands scrambling frantically over the open violin case on her lap. "I'll tell you whatever you want." "That's a good girl," Cale mocked, loosening his grip on her hair slightly, his guard dropping entirely as his arrogance peaked. "Where is the drive?" Elara's trembling fingers wrapped tightly around the leather grip of her custom carbon fiber violin bow. "The ledger isn't a drive," Elara whispered. Suddenly her voice was devoid of all panic. The trembling stopped. The tears vanished. Cale frowned, leaning his face in closer. "What did you say?" "I said," Elara's voice turned to absolute ice, "it's not a drive, you pathetic amateur. With a flick of her wrist so fast Cale couldn't even process it, Elara twisted the base of the violin bow. Snick, a 6-inch razor-sharp tungsten stiletto blade slid out from the hollow carbon shaft. In a blur of lethal motion, Elara exploded upward using her core strength. She didn't slash. She thrust. She drove the stiletto blade directly upward, sinking it deep into the underside of Cale's wrist, right through the median nerve. A gurgling scream tore from Cale's throat as his hand spasmed violently, instantly releasing her hair. The suppressed pistol clattered uselessly to the marble floor. Before Cale could even stumble back in shock, Elara grabbed his silk tie with her left hand. Using the heavy anchored weight of her wheelchair as leverage, she yanked him violently downward. As he crashed heavily to his knees before her, she slammed the bloody tip of her stiletto directly against the corner of his left eye. 1 millimeter deeper, and it would pierce his brain. Cale froze, gasping in agony, his blood dripping onto the pristine white lace of her wedding gown, staining it crimson. "My father didn't hide the blackmail, Cale," Elara said, looking down at him. Her posture was flawless, her tone as cold and commanding as any Mafia don's. "He weaponized it. I know about your offshore accounts in Belize. I know about the mistress in Queens. I memorized every file, every video, every transaction when I was 15 years old. I hold the destruction of the Thorn and Falcone empires in my head." Cale stared up at her, absolute terror finally setting in. She wasn't a victim. She was a weapon her father had armed and left behind. "I've known Dante was watching me for 10 years, Elara continued, pressing the stiletto just enough to draw a bead of blood near his tear duct. "I allowed his men to shadow me. I allowed myself to be brought here because I knew Marcus Falcone would eventually try to finish what he started, and I needed Dante's resources to wipe the Falcones off the map." Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors to the penthouse burst open with the force of an explosion. Dante Thorne stormed in, his light grey suit jacket discarded, his dress shirt stained with blood. Silas and 3 heavily tattooed guards flooded in behind him, weapons drawn, having realized the Teterboro attack was a diversion, and racing back through the city like madmen. Dante froze, the breath completely leaving his lungs. The scene before him defied all logic. His fragile, terrified Elara in her white lace gown was sitting tall in her wheelchair, a bloodied stiletto extending from her violin bow pressed to his top captain's eye. The traitor was kneeling at her paralyzed feet, bleeding onto her lap. Her posture radiated a lethal, cold authority that commanded the room. "Elara," Dante whispered, lowering his weapon an inch, his mind struggling to process the dominant predator sitting in his living room. Elara didn't turn her head. "He sold you out to Marcus Dante for 3 million and a slice of Queens. He came for the ledger." Silas looked at the bleeding, terrified Cale, then at the paralyzed violinist, his jaw practically hitting the floor. "Boss," she completely neutralized him. Dante's shock slowly melted into something far more dangerous. A dark, magnificent smirk spread across his face. The obsession he held for the innocent girl morphed instantly into a profound, terrifying awe for the queen sitting before him. "Silas," Dante ordered, his voice vibrating with lethal pride. "Take Cale to the soundproof room in the basement. He gets to live until he tells us exactly where Marcus Falcone is sleeping tonight. Then he doesn't." "Yes, boss," Silas said roughly, hauling the weeping traitor off the floor and dragging him out of the room, leaving a trail of blood on the marble. The doors clicked shut, leaving Dante and Elara alone in the shattered luxury of the penthouse. Dante holstered his weapon and slowly walked toward her. Elara twisted the handle of her bow. The the stiletto retracting seamlessly back into the carbon shaft. He stopped inches from her wheels. He reached down, his blood-stained, tattooed hands gently framing her face just as they had in the lobby, disregarding the blood staining her white dress. "You played me," Dante murmured, his thumb tracing the surgical scar on her neck. There was no anger in his voice, only a deep, reverent fascination. "For a decade I thought I was the guardian angel protecting a helpless girl." "I was never helpless, Dante," Alara replied, leaning into his touch, a dangerous smile finally breaking across her lips. "You just preferred the illusion. My father was the smartest man in your syndicate. Did you really think he would leave me defenseless?" Dante leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a fierce, possessive promise. "Marcus Falcone dies tonight. Every warehouse, every safe house, every remaining soldier with his blood will burn before the sun comes up." "I know," Alara whispered, her strong hands sliding up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt, pulling him closer to her level. "And when the ashes settle, Dante, we will rebuild this empire together." Unseen by the rest of the city, Dante kissed her deeply, sealing a pact forged in blood and deception. New York City didn't know it yet, but the Mafia hierarchy had just violently shifted. The untouchable Don Thorne had finally met his match, and the most dangerous person in the criminal underworld was the one nobody saw coming. If you were captivated by Alara's hidden strength and Dante's dark obsession, don't forget to hit that like button. We love bringing you these intense stories filled with unexpected twists, betrayal, and absolute vengeance. Want to see what happens next in the underworld? Or have an idea for a new thrilling saga? Drop a comment below and let us know. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a dramatic episode.